welcome back for another segment. Joining us for this conversation is newly elected, re-elected State Representative Josh Cutler, representing the 6th Plymouth District, Pembroke, Duxbury, and Hanson. Representative, congratulations.
Thanks, Kevin. Good to be back.
Good to have you on board. It was a tedious year for an election, was it not?
Well, it was a different kind of year, I would say, with COVID and everything going on at the national level. Definitely a different kind of election, unlike probably any I've experienced so far, but was pleased by the outcome and glad to be for the vote of confidence and glad to be back for another term.
What did you learn about yourself during this particular election? What did you learn? What did you take away from it compared to past runs for re-election?
That's a good question, Kevin. It was definitely different. I mean, because of COVID and not being able to see people face to face as much. I think there's definitely something lost in translation when you're only able to talk, via Zoom or Facebook or whatever. You do miss that personal interaction. I think that can lead to, that definitely is missing when you don't have that personal touch. And so it's disappointing about that. Obviously, under the circumstances, we all do the best we can. And it was definitely a challenging election year. I think there's a lot of hard feelings, strong feelings, I guess, on all sides. And I've tried to be someone who tries to be a bridge builder to reach consensus and to try to, find common ground. And that's what I try to do during the campaign and sort of try to rise above some of the negativity. And so I'm glad that the voters recognize that. And folks of all political stripes, supported me and appreciate the work that I've done. And, we'll continue to do on a bipartisan basis, working with our South Shore team. And I was glad to see, many of my colleagues will be coming back. We have I think a really good team here on the South Shore, Democrats and Republicans. And, certainly there's a lot of challenges. This is going to be an interesting year ahead with COVID and our economic recovery and everything else we're working on. So it's definitely going to be a challenging year. And I think a time to have some experienced hands at the wheel will certainly be a benefit to my constituents and think the whole South Shore.
If you could put a retrospect on earlier this year in March compared to now, we're seeing numbers ticking up, causing the governor to kind of put in effect an order. We all have to wear our masks now. If we're outside, it's no longer just being 6 feet apart, but if we're in public spaces, we have to have a mask. Give me your thoughts as to where the state stands now, because a lot of people, I think, are fearful that we may end up be going into the second wave and that we may end up going into a second lockdown. What are you hearing?
Yeah, and I think, it's unfortunate because that has an impact on people's businesses and livelihoods and so forth. But I think the message that we need to get is, I think the vast majority of people are following health guidance, wearing masks and so forth and doing what they should be doing. But unfortunately, there's there are folks who are not doing that, and we're all paying the price for that small number of people who are not following the health guidelines, the health regulations. And, and I see it, in my daily routine. I'm sure others do as well. And so it's important that we, try to sort of retrench and make sure that everyone understands the seriousness of this. And even if even if you're not worried for yourself or not worried for myself, we all have vulnerable people that we interact with. And so, even if you're not showing symptoms, we're putting people at risk by not taking these sort of safety precautions. So I think it's important. It's a good message. I think it was some tough medicine, to be honest, but an important message to convey that we need to take this seriously and not sort of let our foot off the gas, as I think we did somewhat this fall. So I'm hopeful that these measures will, kind of put this back on a downward trajectory, and we can, try to make progress. But it's important that we not, start going and having, large social gatherings and the kinds of things that we saw, unfortunately, a lot of this fall. So not great news, unfortunately, but we'll persevere.
Have you heard from any of the businesses in your district who are concerned, knowing that they have to close early?
So yeah, I have, and there is some good news. The governor just recently did update the regulations so that, because there was some concern about, if you have a 9:30 shutdown for restaurants, you have to stop service, well before that. So they did clarify that, so that if you have someone who's dining, for instance, they can finish their meal and we're not going to have to close up restaurants at like 8 o'clock. So I think the governor was wise to come up with some additional clarification about that. Obviously, it's still something that it's going to have an impact on folks, and I think we need to take a close look at that. But I think that they wisely took some flexibility with those new regulations.
All right. And as though things, you think because you got reelected that things get easier, but you're back at it. You're going to be discussing the fiscal 2021 budget this week. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so we're almost simultaneously working on 3 different budget years. We did the final closeout for the FY20 budget, because we always have a final kind of supplemental budget to just to pay any last bills or take care of any things that need to be done. So that's done. We're now in the middle of our FY21, our current budget year. And as folks may know, we've been doing a series of temporary budgets to give us more time to kind of see what the financial health of the Commonwealth was, and also to see if the federal government was going to come through with another stimulus package. And so that didn't happen yet. We're still optimistic that may happen. But so we're now sitting down and formalizing a budget for the rest of this year. And the House this week will be taking that up, that budget for FY21, the year that we're currently in. And there's some good news. I mean, some of the more drastic things that we heard about that might have been on the table are not on the table. We're not going to see any drastic cuts to the budget. We're not going to see any big tax hikes in the budget. It's really a maintenance kind of budget that's going to allow us to continue funding the important services that we're currently funding without making cuts and without adding to the tax burden for anyone. We did make an important statement that we're going to hold harmless any cuts to local aid or school funding. And so, in fact, we'll actually see a modest increase in school funding this year, which was really welcome news. So, it's not, it's not a growth budget. It's going to fund every new proposal that we, perhaps want to do. But I think it's a fiscally responsible budget that, that's reflective of the times that we're in, without making cuts that are going to have a harmful impact on vulnerable people or to our cities and towns. So we'll be taking that up this week in the House, and then moving to the Senate and obviously on to the governor. So it's a little bit of a different budget cycle. We're normally doing this kind of work in May and June and April, and then we're doing it now. And then we'll quickly, I think, have to do it again soon when we look at our budget for the next fiscal year, which would be FY22. So lots going on, but I think, relatively good news under the circumstances. I guess that would be the headline I would convey in terms of what's happening.
Again, if you're just tuning in, we are speaking with State Representative Josh Cutler, representing the 6th Plymouth District. I'm going to cherry pick from what you had just responded in regards to the budget, and you talked about education. Knowing that, in the past couple of years that there was an initiative put forth, the Student Opportunity Act, are we seeing a little bit of a bump up because of that, or is it because of something else?
So yes, the short answer is yes. So we did pass. It was actually, I think it was last year at this time, if my memory serves,
Yep.
Which seems like eons ago. We passed a Student Opportunity Act, which made some pretty significant historic investments in public education here in Massachusetts, recognizing that the quality of funding is not the same across the Commonwealth. So trying to address that. And one of the things that it helps with in our area specifically, it had to do with special education funding, what we call the circuit breaker accounts to fund special education needs for our students, which can be a significant cost for our local districts, and obviously an important thing for those students who do need a little extra help. So we did make the historic investment, and we are ramping up some of that funding, not as much as we would perhaps in a regular budget year. But so we were able to continue making progress and building on that. So continuing to implement the new funding that the Student Opportunity Act calls for. And we did see some increases in the special education line items and other line items as well. So I would say we're making progress towards that, Kevin. It's not, probably to the full amount that we would want to see, but under the circumstances, given what we're facing, I think it was, was pretty pleased with the outcome.
And I don't know how many people know this or not, but you're one of the committees that you serve on proudly is the Ways and Means. So you kind of got a little bit of a heads up as to where things are going with this. How is the state doing it in regards to any deficits? And is there any updates as to how it's going to be needed to be offset using the stabilization funding that the state has in tucked away?
Yes. Yeah. So as I do serve on the Ways and Means Committee, and along with Senator O'Connor, I think we're probably the senior members of the Ways and Means Committee here on the South Shore. And so, yes, we're fortunate. We have a stabilization fund here in Massachusetts called the Rainy Day Fund, and we had built that up to about $3.5 billion. And the point of it is to address when it's raining, and it's raining, as I've said before, and this is in a time where I think it's very appropriate to withdraw from that stabilization fund to avoid either pretty serious cuts to local aid or to try to increase the tax burden on people, which I don't think is advisable right now. So we are making a withdrawal of the stabilization fund. About $1.5 billion is what is currently projected. So we'll still have a pretty sizable stabilization fund, but obviously this is a time when we really do need that money. I think in FY22, next fiscal year, we may have to look at that as well. And when in bad times, it's there for a reason. And obviously, when times are better, we build that back up again, so that it does help us to cushion what might be an otherwise pretty challenging budget. So if we didn't have that, and we didn't have the federal stimulus funds, which Congress hasn't come through with yet, at least this latest round, then we'd be really talking a different conversation, Kevin. We'd have significant cuts we'd have to be facing, or either broad-based tax increases, which I think nobody wants to see right now. So having that stabilization fund has really kind of saved our bacon, I guess, in a sense, this budget year. So we're thankful that in years past we did sock away some money for that. So certainly that's something we're going to continue to have to look at closely at, but that is part of our budget this year.
And depending on, again, revenues are always something that's watched, especially by your legislative body. And knowing that we had a pandemic, and you probably had you saw a lot less months where the revenues met the set benchmarks. If you do have any future sub budgets, do you suspect that those monies will go right into the stabilization fund to build it back up, or what?
Well, so we're looking at for the current fiscal year, we're assuming a $2 billion reduction in revenue. So $2 billion less than we thought we would have. And so that's a pretty significant amount in a $46 billion budget. So I think it's too soon to say in terms of building the stabilization fund back up. I mean, right now we're sort of in a different mode, trying to protect services and protect against cuts and protect against any new tax burden on folks. So once we're past this, and hopefully by springtime or soon thereafter, we'll see the light at the end of the tunnel, and the economic factors will hopefully rebound quickly. We have seen the unemployment rate coming down pretty significantly, which is a good sign. But there's still plenty of warning signs, and we know that there's plenty of people out there that are hurting and need help. But so we're hopeful, the optimistic that next year we'll see some better signs, and so that we can quickly, hopefully, move back into move away from the spending the stabilization fund and go back to building it back up again, because it has benefits to our bond rating and to our ability to our debt service load. But we're just not at that point right now. But again, I think the message, Kevin, is we're thankful we live here in Massachusetts, where we made some prudent investments, and we're not going to be in an emergency situation. We have this ability to fall back and look at our rainy day fund, and that's going to really save the day here.
We got a few minutes left in our conversation. Is there anything you want to make sure you touch upon before we wrap up here? Any initiatives that you've been working on, or any bills that may be in committee but might be coming out soon? Anything like that?
Yeah, so we're still working on a number. I mean, the unusual part about this legislative session is normally this time of year would be a pretty quiet part of the year, but right now it's anything but quiet, and our session is continuing forward up until till the very end of the year. And I have some legislation we've been working on, a variety of different things. We have a bill on insurance coverage for PANDAS treatment, which is a childhood illness. Working on issues, our disability commission that we're working on, which is still pending, and our Energy Save Act bill, which passed the House recently to reduce energy costs and save on climate reduction. So a lot of things still sort of in the pipeline that are pretty far along, that we're hoping to get across the finish line before we wrap up the session. So it's actually a busy time, but I guess just a final message to folks: if you do need help, we still seeing unemployment cases come in and people having issues with that, please reach out to us. We're here to be a resource. And I'll just say it, end on a positive note. During the campaign, you have Democrats and Republicans, and you have sort of two sides, but the campaign side is over, and now we're back to governing. And regardless of who you voted for, if you need help, please reach out to me. We're here to help, and we do want to be a resource to everybody.
Any plans for the holidays, whether it's Thanksgiving or Christmas? Are you thinking that far ahead?
I used in the past, I would try to plan a nice little vacation after the election, but for a variety of reasons, that's sort of gone by the books this time. So no, I'm open to ideas.
It's funny you say that, because I actually had a planned cruise in March. Actually, the week that everything kind of was closed down, was supposed to fly to the other coast and jump on a ship. And actually, right around that time, mostly 2 or 3 weeks prior to my particular trip, they had an issue with a ship that had a bunch of folks that was dealing with outbreaks. So,
well, you might be fortunate you didn't get on the ship and then get stranded. So
yeah, that wouldn't be good.
Bright side.
Definitely a bright side. Well, I want to thank you as always for doing different segments with me, whether it's for folks who can watch the segments or folks who can tune in and hear them on the radio. I always appreciate your willingness to do something on a regular basis.
Thanks, Kevin. Glad to be back.
Well, that's all the time that we have here for CrossTalk, the 6th Plymouth District, with State Representative Josh Cutler. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, have a good day.